This week I tackle building a custom open shelf cabinet that's going to permanently address the storage situation above the fridge here and give this whole section a nice finished look. Interested to see how I did it? Well, let's get going. Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Zach, this is Oval Woodworking, and on this channel I tackle woodworking, DIY projects, and just general construction in the hopes that maybe there's some tools or techniques that you'll see that maybe you can apply to your projects. Or, maybe you just want to tune in and have a good laugh at my expense. Either way, thanks for hopping on the channel and checking out the video. If you like what you see, love it if you gave the video a like, consider subscribing, and even hit that bell notification icon so you get notified the next time I drop a new video. So for those of you who follow me on my personal Instagram, about a year and a half ago, my wife and I figured we'd have the great plan of coming up here to the family cottage, which is my in-laws' now primary residence, and completely tearing out the kitchen, including all the flooring, all new kitchen, and doing that while we had a 6-month-old and a new puppy, and had to cook all of our meals on either a microwave on some plywood or maybe the stove that we left in place for as long as possible, and do our dishes in the bathroom sink. It was a great time. That said, most of the kitchen renovation was complete about a year ago, and I'll try to overlay some footage of some of that section that's actually behind the camera here. One of the sections that we didn't quite get to at the time, just due to timing and basically exhaustion, was to permanently address the storage above the fridge. So one of the changes to the layout of the kitchen that my wife designed was to actually relocate the fridge, which used to be over here, and move it over here. And this historically was just a walled off section. There was a little bit of cabinetry here, but there was a cavity in the wall that was just a void and a dead space and unused space. So we opened that all up, recessed the fridge in here, and that allowed us to get more cabinetry over here, as well as just open up the general area where people walk through. By doing that, we also were able to utilize some space above the fridge for extra storage for things like snacks and oversized pieces and stuff that isn't used on an everyday basis and can kind of store them behind there. But like I said, at the time, all we did was put a plywood shelf in and call it a day. Now, as you heard on the intro, we're going to fix that. I'll be building a custom cabinet that's going to go in here. It's going to allow us to continue to use our basket storage for some of those larger snack items, as well as a shelf that's adjustable in the back to better store some of those bigger items that aren't used on a daily basis. And then we are at the cottage. We are just outside the sort of wine capital of the province, so obviously we had to include some wine bottle storage in that as well. So that's what we're going to tackle today. So let's grab our pieces, let's grab our tools, and let's get into it. Okay, so like I said, I'm going to get started, just like I do most projects, and start breaking down my plywood. So I'm going to go get my foam, lay that out, lay my sheet down, and start cutting. So this was stored in a shed, and got a little bit of this edge is a little roughed up just from some water damage, so we'll make sure that that's an in and off cut. We'll start breaking it down. All right, so the largest pieces I have to cut off here have a length of 3 feet, and I'm typically, when I break down my plywood, going to use my Craig Rip cut jig, since I don't have a track saw. But unfortunately the max distance that will go is 24 inches, so I'm going to use a different method here, at least for this first cut, whereas this is 3 feet. I'm just going to use a clamp straight edge for a fence and my circular saw, and then I can move to the rip cut jig after that, and then finish off on the table saw where needed. So I've switched back to the Craig rip cut jig to break this down further. Just make sure here before I make my first cut that I've got this aligned properly. I then moved over to the miter saw where I proceeded to cut down some of the larger pieces into smaller chunks, and then took those to the table saw to cut all of the 10 wine bottle dividers down to their final dimensions and ensure that they were the exact same width. Alright, so I have all my pieces now cut down to their final dimension. So I just need to sort them. They are all labeled, but I'm going to sort them so that I ensure I know which pieces get the pocket holes drilled, because not all pieces will. I'm going to assemble this in a way that all the pocket holes are hidden, and any area that would otherwise be visible will go with glue and brad nails. So I'll sort that out, get the Craig jig out, and start drilling out pocket holes. Okay, now that we have our pocket holes all drilled out for the pieces that need it, I'm going to go ahead and give each piece a sanding. I'm going to start with 150 and then move to 220, and then we'll be ready to start with the glue up and assembly. Okay, so we have our temporary little workbench set up. You can see behind me, got all my pieces laid out. As you saw, I've got them all prepped. I decided to prep them all ahead of time and transport them in the pile of pieces versus the assembled cabinet. A little bit easier to get it in the vehicle and transport it up as well. That way, if I did need to make any minor adjustments or changes while on site, I can do that before fully assembling it. So first things first, we're going to build the carcass. I'm going to use, as you saw, pocket holes, some glue. I'm going to build that, dry fit it in the hole just to make sure it fits up. As well, that'll allow us then to drill out our holes for that back shelf. And then once that's all done, we'll get the section with the wine bottle components assembled and then installed. So we'll get going, we'll get our parts laid out. They are all labeled as you saw, so I should have a relatively easy time getting them all laid out correctly and in the right orientation. And then we'll get going. Let me back.
So you're going to build it all and put it together on here?
Yeah, at least the carcass.
Yeah.
and then that way I can, like I said, test fit it in the hole and make sure that it fits before I do anything. That's top. Okay. Have to figure out, I labeled them all, I just had to figure out my labeling. I'm gonna get this side piece, so this is our bottom, which is in the orientation that it's gonna go in the cavity. And this is our side piece that's gonna go on here. So I'm just gonna make sure I've got my clamps ready and get some glue in that and some screws. Glue ups can always be a little bit stressful, and this one was no different. As you'll hear me mention a couple of times in the video, it was a pretty hot day out this day. It was about between 25 and 30 degrees Celsius depending on the time of day. So even though I wanted to sort of take my time and square everything up as I worked around the carcass and added each piece, I was pretty cognizant of the fact that the glue was drying pretty quickly. So not only did I need to work quick, make sure my pieces were in the right spot before putting the screws in, but any of the squeeze out I had to try to get cleaned up as quick as possible before it soaked into the fibers. So as luck would have it, I actually brought my nephew up this trip. He was done with school for the summer, had some time, and had an interest in construction and carpentry and woodworking. So I figured I'd bring him up with me and I'd show him a little bit and get him to do some of the work with me. Both him and my father-in-law were on site, so that really helped out here. They were able to kind of go behind me with some wet rags and clean up the joints as soon as we got that squeeze out. Tried to limit any that got into the pores that would affect the look and the absorption of the stain once we went to the finishing stage.
Edge here. That's already hard.
Okay, so we got the carcass completely assembled. Took it inside, dry fitted in the opening. Everything's looking good. So now I'm going to start on assembly of the wine bottle storage component. Get that all assembled so that I can then slide that in place within the carcass in one solid piece. So we'll get started. Same thing here, some glue, some pocket holes, and then in order to get this completely hidden with any kind of fasteners, I will be drilling out and countersinking some other screws, and I'll show you when I get to that. So we'll get started and get this assembled. Oh, that's a good start. Okay, so just for clarity, this is actually going to be oriented this way in the cabinet. So this is going to be the back. This will be the divider that opens up to the larger cavity. And then in here is going to be our wine bottle, and this will be the side of the cabinet. So I'm going to build this as a unit that can then slide in place. So I've got my back piece, I've got my inside divider, and then I have all of these pieces that are all milled the same. So what I'm going to do is, so you can see there's some pocket holes, so I'll actually install those in such a way so that the pocket holes are on the top, and because this is a cabinet that's up above the refrigerator, you're never going to see those. And then once I get those in place and we go to put in this piece, which is the next divider, because there'll be 2 rows of
wine bottle holder opening thingies.
I will countersink screws through there, because these are only going to be 3 3/4 inch square openings, so there's no way I'd be able to get my drill, even if I had sort of like a right angle attachment. It'd be pretty tough to get it in and drill a pocket hole from the other side once this piece was on. So hopefully that'll makes a little bit more sense as you see me assemble this. So as I said, we'll put one at the top, one at the bottom, And again, this side here is actually going to be the top, so all of my pocket holes will be facing up. And then I'll measure these out so that they're perfect, and I'll space them out accordingly, like this, so that we end up having 4 perfectly square openings. Internal divider will then come on here, screw to our back piece, and then I'll repeat with 5 more of those pieces, and then that entire unit can then get assembled inside the cavity of the cabinet. Okay, so rather than trying to perfectly measure each of the 4 compartments to make sure that they're exactly the same width, what I'll actually end up doing is, since this is the first side and I have a lot of these extra pieces for the second side, I'll actually use one of them as a spacer. So what I'll do, because these are 3 3/4 inch square, so this way and this way. So if I use one of my pieces for this tier as my spacer, I can butt my piece up against it here, and then I know that I'm going to be perfectly square, and then I'll keep going until I get all of these in place. And I'll just be careful, since this is going to be a piece that I'm going to use, be careful not to have too much excess glue squeeze out and get that all over that piece. But like I said, I'll just use it for a spacer, and yeah, should work out quite well. Unfortunately, this method, as you can see here, didn't work out great. I squeezed that piece between the 2 dividers so tight I actually had to remove it and try again, just by putting the extra piece in on either end to space out the gap. This way it wasn't flat between the 2 dividers, didn't get any glue squeeze out on it, and it was easy to remove each time. And so I just repeated that for the rest of this tier and the next. Okay, so I'm just measuring out where I can countersink a couple of holes here just to cinch the back up. And then just drive these and hope that my measurements are right. Sounded promising. And none split, so that's good. So our inside divider will then go on top here. It'll get secured again to the back panel, but because could have done it with at least this one, but all the other dividers, it would have been too difficult to try to go in here and screw pocket holes into this, in through here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, same thing, I'll measure out, cut myself a line, and do a few countersunk holes to secure this piece to all these dividers. So we'll get this in place first, and then measure all that up. Alright, so I don't know how much of the other footage I actually got, because I found out after the fact that the phone had stopped because it had overheated, because it is pretty warm out here today, but regardless, we'll keep moving along. So like I was saying, with this next row of dividers, they're going to all sit in line with this row. So I want to make sure these screws and the ones I put through here are countersunk so that we don't have any issues that way. But also, I want to make sure that where I place the screws doesn't line up with where the pocket holes are drilled, because we don't want to end up trying to put a pocket hole where a screw is, because that won't work out so well. Get it here. So we'll move along, similar to how we did here, but before that I'll probably do another 2 screws in each of these. So I'll just trace out a line so that I make sure that I actually hit the divider and not split the wood and go through the side of it or somehow randomly into the middle of the opening. Okay, so we have that all assembled as one unit. So as you can see, we've got 8 slots for wine bottles. This will be the going inside of the larger box, with this being the outside edge, so we'll secure it that way. And this will be the inside of the larger aspect of the cabinet. And then behind this will be where our shelf, our adjustable shelf will sit. So I'm just going to give this a little light sanding now that I've installed it. Try to get any of the little bits of the edges nice and flush, and if I got any glue that I wasn't able to clean up because it was drying so quick as we're outside and it's quite warm, I'll get this cleaned up. And then we'll test fit it and see if my measurements work. Alright, so it is going to go right in alongside this side of the cabinet, and it should be a pretty tight fit. Things are looking promising. It's nice and snug. And I think, get that all the way over. I don't want to push it all the way back, but it's looking pretty darn good. Actually, you know what? Let's do it. Let's get it flush with that front edge. Or flush there. The old hand hammer, always a good option. So I'm not going to secure it all the way, but that looks like a pretty good fit to me. So I'll take this back out, and then before we go to actually install this permanently with some screws, perhaps a little glue, although it's a pretty tight fit, I'm going to remove this, and then in behind is where our shelf is going to be for those items that aren't used all the time. So I'm going to pull this out, and then I'm going to pre-drill the shelf pin holes. Just this coming out will give me a little bit room, be less in the way. So we'll get that out, get set up to drill those out, and once those are done we can begin the final assembly. Alright, so as I said, I'm just going to get the shelf pin holes drilled in the back of the cabinet here, so we can get that all ready for the shelf before we go ahead and put that wine bottle holder assembly in place. I was just looking around to see if I had my extra set of hands handy, and I think may have found better things to do. Regardless, we'll continue on. So this is the Craig shelf pin jig. I've just got it sort of seated on my drill here now. So I'm just going to get this stop collar set to the right depth here so that the piece of the drill bit that sticks out past the jig is deep enough, and I'm going to use these, oops, I'm going to use these locking shelf pins, and so I'm just going to use the shelf pin itself to kind of size my depth. So you can see I'm just a little bit too shallow. Got the brad point of the drill bit hitting up against the backside, so I need to go a little bit deeper so that the whole shelf pin will sit inside. So we'll get that set up and then we'll start drilling them out. Okay, so I'm going to get my jig in place. I apologize if it's a little echoey inside of the cabinet. So as I said, our shelf is going to go in the back here. It's going to be behind the wine piece that goes here. The shelf is going to be 10 inches deep. So I'm going to put my jig in right up against the back, drill my first set of holes here, and then I'll space them off. I'll figure out the measurement, what I want to do, but so that we can have two, not too far, or not too close to the front edge of the 10-inch shelf, but a few inches over from that. And then we'll repeat it on the other side, and we'll be good to go. Okay, so we got our first two holes drilled. So these will be really the lowest you'd even consider putting the shelf. Probably won't even ever put it this low, but we'll put it there as an option. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, I'm actually going to flip it over, and this section right up top will be my reference. So I'll put the pin that comes with it in through the reference piece, in through my hole, and then I'll continue to drill some and all the way up. Well, not all the way up. Pop my pin out, and there we go. So we've got 6 options there for our shelf. Again, given what's going to be stored here, I don't expect that we'd need to put a shelf any higher than this. Even this is probably too high, but it's there as an option. Same thing here for that low. We'll probably be somewhere in the middle there, but we've got some options. So I'll repeat the exact same process this way. We'll just mark out where our shelf is going to stop. As I said, is 10 inches. So we're going to be about there, and we're 2 inches off the back, so let's mirror that. Let's go 8 inches for that one. And there we have it. So 2 perfectly level rows of shelf pin holes that will support the 10-inch deep shelf, about 2 inches from the back, 2 inches from the front of that shelf. And that's all it takes, a little Craig jig. If you had to do a lot more, you had a really big cabinet, you can buy multiple of these and stack them so that you don't have to keep changing them after every 6 holes or so. But I only had 6, so it was pretty quick and easy. So I'll just repeat it on the other side, and then we'll put some pins in and test fit our shelf. Moment of truth. Shelf pin holes are all drilled on either side. Pop them in the 4 holes, third from the bottom everywhere, and in goes our shelf for a test fit. Looks good on all 4 pins. Fits great. Our wine assembly, our shelf here. Okay, good fit there. We'll get that screwed in place, and we'll give it one more quick little sanding before we bring it back inside. All right, so there it is. We got it all assembled. All the edge banding is now done, sanded down. Everything's been wiped down clean. I've got the shelf separate in the back as well. Again, that got edge banded just like the face of the cabinet. So next and final step is the finishing. So we'll get some stain. We're going to go with the Ipswich pine wood stain. Based on color, it's going to be probably the closest approximation to the current pine that will be all around this. Now the pine was original stained probably in the late 70s, early 80s, so lots of aging and weathering, so there's no way we're going to match that perfectly, but this will be close enough. So we'll get that on, we'll get a first coat on and probably let it dry overnight and get a second coat on tomorrow, and then some top coats with a bit of poly and get this installed. Well, there you have it. A custom built-in cabinet with some recessed open shelving, larger open front section for some basket storage, and some wine bottle storage on the left-hand side. All in all, not too difficult of a project. Something easy that you can do with just some plywood and some relatively basic tools. I didn't show too much of the install. It was a little hectic here with people coming and going through the kitchen as well. It was a fairly slow and tedious process trying to weave in some of the pieces of pine above and below to match what was existing using some of the old pieces that we pulled out. But all in all, it's installed. A couple of minor pieces of trim just to finish things off, but otherwise it's good to go and we're ready to fill it up. If you liked the video, love it if you give it a like, consider subscribing to the channel and hit that notification icon so you get notified the next time I drop a video. Till next time, thanks again for watching, and we'll see you on the next project.